This young man, go ahead, pal, you're up.
Okay. Your solutions on stopping drug trade is give up. Give up the war on drugs. I say zero tolerance. We use the military for aid. We stop it from getting into the country. We cut it off at the source. Why give up another fight?
What we give up on is a tyrannical approach to solving a social medical problem, and we endorse the idea of voluntarism and self-responsibility, family, friends, and churches to solve problems, rather than saying some monolithic government is going to make you take care of yourself and be a better person. It's a preposterous notion. It never worked. It never will. The government can't make you a better person. It can't make you follow good habits. Why don't they put you on a diet? You're a little overweight, and I think you need better health.
I guess the most controversial stand which libertarians have now is on drugs. You probably get a lot of criticism because you want to legalize drugs, right?
Well, but I think the most controversial thing about the whole drug problem is zero tolerance. I think that's what's controversial, this idea that we have no privacy. There's no financial privacy or privacy in our home because the Drug Enforcement Agency can break our doors down looking for a cigarette butt. They confiscate cars and boats, and houses are bulldozed down, all in the name of teaching people not to have bad habits. They're spending $10 billion. I think it's an incredible program of failure. So the controversy is really in the hands of the government, Democrats and Republicans, who are saying the same thing, and each party tries to outdo the other, and they're actually absolutely obsessed with this. At the same time, they care not a lick about, our civil liberties. But the drug laws have only been here since 1914. About that time, we had the income tax, the Federal Reserve System, the FBI, licensing to protect certain industries and professions. Then we decided we were going to tell people how to live and what their habits ought to be. That's when they introduced the ideas of prohibition of alcohol. Didn't work very well, and so that was finally repealed. But libertarians detest drug dealers. And that's one reason why we want to get rid of the laws. We want to get the drug dealer out of business overnight because he can't exist unless the drug price is very high. So a lot of good people inadvertently are the allies of the drug dealers if they like the drug laws. The people who write those laws and like those laws inadvertently promote crime. Every drug addict, because he has to pay these exorbitant amounts for their drugs, commit on the average 260 felonies a year to raise the money. That would be totally unnecessary. Who raises that kind of money to go buy a six-pack at the drugstore? They don't have to do that because the alcohol is available, and alcohol kills more people than drugs. Cigarettes, they kill 325,000 people a year, and what are we required to do? Subsidize the tobacco industry. I mean, if people want to really do good, let's just quit subsidizing tobacco, get the government out of the sale of alcohol, and go that way. But the crime rate would go down, the drug dealers would be out of business. I think the kids wouldn't be as exposed either. It's pretty hard to tell a kid that's just dropped out of a public school where he was totally bored and he's on the street corner and decides he wants a job and buy a car. Talk him into working at McDonald's for $4 an hour when he can make $400 a day doing a little work for the local drug merchant. There's no way. He's tempted and he yields to the temptation, so we literally set the stage by these drug laws to get more kids involved, and I think that's horrible. I think the kids they certainly deserve some protection. We deserve at least to create an environment where they're not so likely to be forced into the drug trade.
Now, you're a medical doctor, and you think that legalizing all these drugs would be good. Do your medical colleagues and the medical profession, do they agree with this?
No, to a minority. Matter of fact, I think that even drugs for treating oneself should be more readily available to people. Not that I think people should do it unwisely and use a lot of fancy medication without some advice, but if drugs were more available, if a nurse could prescribe penicillin, it certainly would be a lot cheaper. Nurses are capable of telling you whether you have a strep throat or not. It would drive the cost down. So doctors have a little protectionism involved. They like their little monopoly. So the AMA, matter of fact, the AMA lobbied me in Washington to vote against even allowing doctors to give heroin for dying cancer patients who couldn't have their pain relieved from morphine. But they did not want this to happen because they wanted to have control, and they didn't want to look like they were soft on drugs, but they want control. So whether it's the drugs necessary right now, the FDA, I think, does a horrible disservice to us all by making it very difficult for AIDS and cancer patients to do alternative treatments. Yeah. You know, they're smuggling drugs from Mexico. You know, we think of Mexico as a socialist state, and yet they can get drugs more readily there, and we're having dying cancer patients, AIDS patients, smuggling drugs up into the free United States in order for them to take this medicine. But the FDA argues, well, we got to make sure it's safe and effective. Well, if somebody's dying, don't you think they have the right to take a chance on a drug, on an experimental drug? But the AMA isn't helpful in here, and the medical profession is very poor. A lot of doctors would agree with me, but I think they like the idea that they're sort of godlike and they get to write prescriptions, and they certainly think that opening up this whole barrel, so to speak, would be detrimental to their protection, and they're interested in organized medicine.
What about the police and law enforcement profession? Would they be for your point of view? They would put a lot of them out of work.
I think a lot of them would make a lot less money. You know, their system has been corrupted by it.
Oh gosh, it's terrible.
It's you know, another example of how foolish some of these laws are is the prisons are running rampant with drugs. If we can't keep drugs out of the prison, how are we going to keep drugs off the street? Which means it's very much a corrupting influence. I mean, we read stories. I'm sure the majority of the police are not involved, but you don't need very many to really make a lot of money off it. So there are going to be some officials who would agree with us, and I've had some. There was an interesting story of an individual when my staff went to work for a candidate who was running for a governorship in a large city, and they brought all the district attorneys together because crime was the #1 issue in that state. And they said that the only way you could ever get rid of crime would be, and they all agreed on this, is you'd have to get rid of the drug law. So behind closed door, without the press, they agreed the drug laws created crime. And you know what they said? You can't ever achieve that because there are too many people on the take, too many judges and too many policemen like this, so just forget about it. We can't deal with it, and it's too much of an emotional issue anyway. But it is an important issue. I think the discussion has progressed a whole lot in the last 6 months. I think we as libertarians have done a whole lot of good in getting this discussion out, and I am going to continue to debate this because as a parent of 5 children and as a physician and as a non-drug user, I think that I have some credibility in making this debate on the idea that drugs ought to be decriminalized.
Let's talk about what could be the most explosive issue of this campaign if the mass media would get a hold of it and do something about it, but they're covering it up. And that is you were talking about the government involvement in drugs. There have been government investigations, there have been private investigations, and we've interviewed a lot of people, ex-CIA people, who have talked about the CIA involvement in drug operations for many decades. It's public knowledge, though once again the media are not saying anything about it, that Oliver North and his people involved with the Contras have been running drug operations, cocaine primarily, bringing it back into the United States. And there are other investigations which show that George Bush's office, Donald Gregg particularly, and the people he was working with, have been supervising an enormous drug operation, which once again was sending illegal arms down to the Contras and elsewhere, and bringing cocaine and other types of drugs back into the United States. But neither the Democrats aren't talking about this. Now, are the libertarians talking about this, and did they put this into the framework of the drug law situation that you're talking about?
We talk about a whole lot. Of course, we always have the trouble of getting the attention that we think it deserves. There have been a few Democrats have talked about it. Senator Kerry's office has done some work. He's done a lot of the investigation. Right, and I think he's on to something, and I think we've gotten some other information too, of course, that the CIA has given Noriega over the years $200,000 a year.
Oh, yes.
And they kept feeding him money, even when Bush was the head of the CIA. I think George Bush is deep into it, well over his head. Somebody asked me once if I thought George Bush knew about as much what's going on as Ronald Reagan. I think George Bush knew a lot more about what was happening in the CIA, because I think Reagan was probably more removed from it. I mean, just by his own personality and maybe his age or something. But I think George Bush, through his office and through the fact that he was a member of this, head of the CIA, I think he was very, very close to it. He knows exactly what was happening, and I believe the rule that once a CIA member, always a CIA member. And I think it's awful interesting. Can you imagine? It would alarm a few of us in this country if all of a sudden we knew that the leader in the Soviet Union would be the head KGB agent, and here we take our head CIA agent and put him, potentially the head of our entire country. Unfortunately, I wish that we could get this information out, and I continue to talk about it, but I sadly believe that there will be very little said, which means that the Democrats aren't doing it, that means they're involved too.
They're involved also.
And I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, it was even some of it got reported in the Iran-Contra scandals. We did know that there were drugs involved, and they were selling drugs back and forth. I think that might be the #1 reason for the drug laws. I mean, they use and play on the good people of America to support them, but I think the #1 reason is not to have high prices for some two-bit drug dealer as much as to raise the funds necessary for governments to do illegal things, whether it's some terrorist government someplace or whether it's our own CIA to fund programs that they can't get Congress to fund. I think it's tragic, and the sooner we get rid of the drug laws, the sooner this would end.